أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير. الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز الغفور. الذي خلق 7 سماوات طباقا ما ترى في خلق الرحمن من تفاوت فارجع البصر هل ترى من فطور ثم ارجع البصر كرتين ينقلب إليك البصر خاسئا وهو حسير. ولقد زينا السماء الدنيا بمصابيح وجعلناها رجوما للشياطين وأعتدنا لهم عذاب السعير. وللذين كفروا بربهم عذاب جهنم وبئس المصير. إذا ألقوا فيها سمعوا لها شيئا وهي تفور تكاد تميز من الغيظ كلما ألقي فيها فوج سألهم خزنتها ألم يأتكم نذير قالوا بلى قد جاءنا نذير فكذبنا وقلنا ما نزل الله من شيء إن أنتم إلا في ضلال كبير. وقالوا لو كنا نسمع أو نعقل ما كنا في أصحاب السعير فاعترفوا بذنبهم فسحقا لأصحاب السعير. إن الذين يخشون ربهم بالغيب لهم مغفرة وأجر كبير. وأسروا قولكم أو اجهروا به إنه عليم بذات الصدور. ألا يعلم من خلق وهو اللطيف الخبير. هو الذي جعل لكم الأرض ذلولا فامشوا في مناكبها وكلوا من رزقه وإليه النشور. أأمنتم من في السماء أن يخسف بكم الأرض فإذا هي تمور أم أمنتم من في السماء أن يرسل عليكم حاصبا فستعلمون كيف نظير. ولقد كذب الذين من قبلهم فكيف كان نكير. أولم يروا إلى الطير فوقهم صافات ويقبض ما يمسكوهن إلا الرحمن إنه بكل شيء بصير. أمن هذا الذي هو جند لكم ينصركم من دون الرحمن إن الكافرون إلا في غرور. أمن هذا الذي يرزقكم إن أمسك رزقه بل لجوا في عتو ونفور. أفمن يمشي مكبا على وجهه أهدى أمن يمشي سويا على صراط مستقيم. قل هو الذي ينشأكم وجعل لكم السمع والأبصار والأفئدة قليلا ما تشكرون. قل هو الذي ذرأكم في الأرض وإليه تحشرون. ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين قل قل إنما العلم عند الله وإنما أنا نذير مبين فلما رأوا زلفة سيئت وجوه الذين كفروا وقيل هذا الذي كنتم به تدعون قل أرأيتم إن أهلكني الله ومن معي أو رحمنا فمن يجير الكافرين من عذاب أليم قل هو الرحمن آمنا به وعليه توكلنا فستعلمون من هو في ضلال مبين قل أرأيتم إن أصبح ماؤكم غورا فمن يأتيكم بماء معين صدق الله العلي العظيم رحم الله من قرأ سورة مباركة الفاتحة.
صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تقطع الرجاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متدلل خاشع أن تصامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وانزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائحي ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا خيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته وكم من فادح من البلاء أقلته وكم من عثار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرت بي سوء حالي وقصرت بي أعمالي وكعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد آمالي وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومطالي. يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك ألا يحجب عنك الدعاء سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك أسأله كشف ضري والنذر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي فغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعد حدودك وخالفت بعد أوامرك فلك الحجة علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاءك وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك. وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مكرا مذعنا معترفا لا أجد مفر مما كان مني ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة من رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ذري وفكني من شدي وثاقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي. يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي هبني لابتداء كرمك وسالفي برك بي. يا إلهي وسيدي وربي أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد من طوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهج به لساني من ذكرك واعتقده ضميري من حبك وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك. هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيت أو تبعد من أدنيت أو تشرد من آويت أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمت. وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقا وبشكرك مادحا وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققا وعلى ضمائر حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعا وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك طائعا وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنا. ما هكذا ذنبك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم. يا ربي وأنت تعلم ضعفي أنا قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكثور يصير بقاء قصير مدة. فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل الوقوع المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض. يا سيدي فكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين. يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها أضج وأبكي لأليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته. فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك، وفرقت بيني وبين حبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي. صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك، وهبني. صبرت على هر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك، أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجاء عفوك، فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج الآملين، ولا أصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين، ولا أبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين، ولا أنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين، يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين. أفتراق سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته، وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته، وهو يضج إليك ضجيجا مؤمل لرحمتك، ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك، ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك. يا مولاي فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك، أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك، أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه، أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفا، أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقا، أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا رب، أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها. هيهات ما ذلك ظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك، ولا مشبه لما عاملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك، فباليقين أخدع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحدك وقضيت به من إخلاد معاندك، لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما، وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما، لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين، وأن تجل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا وتتونت بالإنعام متكرما، فمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي، فأسألك بالقدرة الذي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيح أسررته وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته أخفيته أو أظهرته وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم وبرحمتك أخفيت وبفضلك سترت وأن توفر حظي من كل خير تنزله أو إحسان تفضله أو بر تنشره أو رزق تبسطه أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي يا من بيده ناصيتي يا عليما بدري ومسكنتي يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورا وبخدمتك موصولا وأعمالي عندك مقبولا حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي يا ربي يا ربي قوي على خدمتك جوارحي واشدد على العزيمة جوانحي وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك حتى أصرح إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في المبادرين واشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين وذنو منك ذنو المخلصين وخافك مخافة الموقنين واجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرد ومن كادني فكد واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك وقربهم منزلة منك وخصهم زلفة لديك فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك وجدني بجودك واعطف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما ومن علي بحسن إجابتك وقلني عثرتي واغفر زلتي فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وضمنت لهم الإجابة فإليك يا ربي نصبت وجهي، وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي، ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي. يا سريع الرضا، يا سريع الرضا، اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء، فإنك فعال لما تشاء، يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى. ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاحه البكاء، يا سابغ النعم، يا دافع النقام، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام، يا عالما لا يعلم. صل على محمد وآل محمد وفعل بي ما أنت أهله، وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا. رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة.
محمد وآل محمد صلوات. یا امام عسکری، یا امام عسکری، یا امام عسکری، یا امام عسکری، بھیجیے بیٹے کو مولا، منتظر ہے ماتمی، یا امام عسکری، یا امام عسکری، یا امام عسکری، یا امام عسکری. داستان ظلم مولا اب جہاں سے ختم ہو، جب تلک مہدی نہ آئے روک دیجئے وقت کو. اللہ جل کے گزرتی جا رہی ہے ہر صدی، یا امام عسکری، یا امام عسکری، یا امام عسکری، یا امام عسکری. ظالموں نے زہر مولا آپ کو ایسا دیا، دست و پا کے ناخنوں سے خون جاری ہو گیا. آپ کی غربت کو دیکھا یاد شب بر آ گئی، یا امام عسکری یا امام عسکری یا امام عسکری یا امام عسکری دفن شہ نے جس طرح سے آپ نے اصغر کو کیا آ گیا نظروں میں ہائے منظر کرب و بلا اپنی تربت آپ نے جو گھر میں خود تیار کی یا امام عسکری یا امام عسکری یا امام عسکری یا امام عسکری گھر میں داخل ہو گئے تھے ظلم ڈھانے کے لیے پرسہ دینے کے بجائے قتل کرنے کے لیے ڈھونڈتے تھے چاروں جانب تیرے مہدی کو شکی یا امام عسکری یا امام عسکری یا امام عسکری یا امام عسکری پردہ غیبت میں مہدی بھی طرف کر رہ گیا 11 صدیوں بعد یہ پھر سے ستم ڈھایا گیا آپ کے روزے کا گرنا ہے شہادت دوسری یا امام عسکری یا امام عسکری یا امام عسکری یا امام عسکری مادر شبیر کا تعمیر روزہ دیکھ لیں گھر میں خالق کے تکلم شہ کا ماتم دیکھ لے کم سے کم اتنی برادہ ماتمی کی زندگی یا امام عسکری 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 محمد و آل محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Sayyid Hassan Rizvi, respected elders, brothers, sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for all the names listed on the screen and Kul Arwah al-Mu'mineen wal-Mu'minat, Sawab al-Fatiha. Ayat Mayyujibun is requested for all the names listed on the screen and whoever is in need of it here and elsewhere. Let us all recite it together. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم عما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Now let us invite Sayyid to come forward to recite tonight's majlis. Per Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad salawat.
رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة بعد الصلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وبه نستعين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين سيدنا والنبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا وطبيب ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين المكرمين الخيرين الفاضلين السيدين الصادقين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين روحي وأرواح العالمين لتراب مقدمه الفداء ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. مؤمنين مؤمنات, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Salamun alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight, on this Thursday night, on this Shabbat Jummah program, we are gathered commemorating on the night of the 8th of Rabi-ul-Awwal, the Shahadat of the 11th Imam, Imam Hassan ibn Ali al-Askari alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Muhammad. Even though, as we have seen from the time of the first Imam up until the 11th, the amount of information that we have about these Imams starts to gradually decline. And it comes to a point where when the 9th, 10th, 11th, and especially the 11th, we have very, very little information about his life and then about his death. But from the little bit that we do have in our hands, in our books that the ulama have passed down, there are some interesting stories that I think we can go through and maybe learn. There was once one of the students of the 11th Imam. He had come to him. At this point, this student of the 11th Imam, the name is not mentioned in the hadith, but this student, he was studying under one of the great philosophers of that time. Some say it was a person by the name of Ishaq al-Kindi. Somebody says it was Abu Yusuf ibn Ishaq al-Kindi. There's different narrations and different ideas about who it was. That's not our concern. But this philosopher was in Iraq. Apparently he was hired by the Abbasid regime, and he was good at what he did, basically. So this was a person who was pretty much a Shia, right? The student of the Imam, who was also simultaneously studying with this philosopher, right? Now, this famous philosopher had been writing a book and compiling information. And what he was compiling was all of the different, according to him, contradictions that he found in the Quran. Anything that this philosopher, whatever he found in the Quran that he believed was a contradiction, he tried to put these together. And the idea was he wanted to publish a book that was, contained all of the different contradictions in Islam. So some historians say that, this is evidence that the philosopher that this student of the Imam was studying under wasn't a Muslim, was probably a Christian or something like that. And this person's job, while he was teaching philosophy, was trying to, defeat Islam. And one of the ways was to show them that, look, your book, your Quran, is full of contradictions. So now, again, a Shia, a student of the 11th Imam, is also studying with this philosopher who's compiling evidence or information, trying to say that the Quran is full of contradictions. So at one point, the student is now, he's going back and forth, so he's visiting the 11th Imam. When the Imam saw him, and he knew that he was studying with this philosopher, and he asked about the situation, about is he your teacher, still compiling this evidence about the contradictions, etc. He said, yes, he is. So he then asks, the 11th Imam asks this student, he says, isn't there any wise, intelligent individual amongst you, meaning amongst him or any of the Shias who attend these classes, these philosophy classes, isn't there anybody who can respond to the issues of your teacher, Al-Kindi? Can't you, answer, refute him and object to him? And their student responds, kind of in a coy fashion, I suppose, we are his students, and he's the teacher. We can't say anything in terms of the mistakes or supposed mistakes that our teacher is making. So the Imam replies to his student. He says, look, if I instruct you, if I give you a command, if I tell you exactly what to say, and I give you clear instructions, will you go and just say, give these words and say what I'm telling you to your teacher? I said, yeah, of course I'll do that. I said, okay, fine. So once you're done meeting me, you're done with your business here, right, in Samarra. Obviously, he was visiting the Imam. When you're done here and you go back to your teacher, then go and say this. First, there's a few steps. Before you say these words I'm about to tell you, I want you to do a few things first. When you go to your teacher, I want you to increase the amount of time you spend with him. I want you, whatever amount of closeness, affection, affiliation, familiarity, love, kindness, and adoration that you showed to him, I want you to increase that first. Show him a lot more respect. Try to be one of those, basically like a teacher's pet. Try to get as close to him as you can. He said, once you have spent some time, and you are basically like that teacher's pet, like you're one of the favorite students, and you're very close with them and you're very familiar, then tell him this. Say, look, tell your teacher, your ustad, say, look, a problem has, arisen for me that nobody except you can answer. Is it possible that the author of the Quran has intended and meant a meaning other than what I might or we might have assumed it to be? Could the author of the Quran have meant something other than what, people like us understand? And so again, this is the Imam dictating to his student what he should tell him. The Imam is telling him, look, I know what he's going to reply to you. Your teacher will reply, yes, such a thing is possible. Once your teacher replies that to you, that philosopher replies that to you and says it's possible, then this is what you say back to him. Say, okay, then how are you so certain that perhaps the author of the Quran meant something other than what you have assumed, and that you have used its wording in a manner, other than its true meaning? So the Imam's saying all this, right? And then the Imam concludes. He says, look, this teacher of yours, he's an intelligent person. If you present this point to him, that'll be enough for him to make him aware of the mistake that he's made. So the student says, okay, no problem. So he returns back to his teacher. He acted exactly as the Imam commanded him to, right? He showed more love, more respect, more adoration. He became one of the more friendlier, the closer students to this teacher. And then he posed the question as the Imam instructed him. So he goes to his teacher one day and he says, look, is it possible that a narrator can relate something and intend one meaning, but the people who hear it, they hear something else or they understand something else? So much so that the narrator's intent is actually lost on the listener. He's like, is that possible? So the philosopher, the teacher, he's listening to his student's question, and he's listening very attentively. He thinks for, he doesn't answer right away. He thinks for a few minutes. Then he goes to him again. He says, the teacher tells the student, he says, can you repeat your question? I said, okay. He repeated the question. The teacher then waits. He deliberates for some time. He thinks about it. He says, yeah, what you're saying is not impossible. It's not improbable at all. It's possible that a narrator possesses something in his mind, a niyat, an intention, what they have, their maqsad or hadaf, and that doesn't occur to the person who's listening, right? It happens to us a lot of times too. I might say something and you guys are hearing something completely different, right? It happens. The one who hears it understands a meaning which runs counter to that from what the narrator has expressed. So now this teacher, after he sees, what's going on here, he's like, okay. He's like, look, this teacher knows his student. He knows that this student is not at this intellectual level where he could have thought up about this kind of question on his own. So he looks at him, he's like, look, be straight with me, tell me the truth. How did such a question come to your mind? How did you think about this? Why did you think about asking something like this to me? So the student, again, trying to play nice, trying to play innocent. It's like, why couldn't something just have come to me naturally? I got inspired or whatever. He's like, look, it's too early in your studies for you to have thought of such a deep question on your own, right? A real teacher would know their student. He's like, you couldn't have thought of this on your own. You had to have heard it from somewhere else. Tell me, for real, where did you learn this? Who told you about this? So then the student's like, okay, here's the truth. The truth is that somebody named Abu Muhammad, who of course is Imam Hassan ibn Ali al-Askari alayhi salatu wassalam. He's the one who instructed me about this question and he told me to, ask you like this. And the teacher said, yeah, that's the truth, definitely. Why? He said, because such advanced questions can only come from that family. There's nobody else who can ask questions like this. Then the teacher, because of all this back and forth, he realized his error. He understood the truth just from the line of questioning without even the student going forward. And he asked the student, he said, can you light a fire? He lit a fire. He went back and he grabbed his manuscript, the collection of all those contradictions, and he burnt it right away because he understood what had actually happened. So without the Imam even having met this individual, he was able to guide him to the truth, right? Sometimes we think about, how can the 12th Imam, he's not in front of us, how can he guide us? He's the sun behind the clouds, what's going on? Look, even when the Imam is alive, just through some of his students, he was able to lead this person who was possibly a Christian philosopher with an objective to try to destroy Islam through these apparent contradictions. Just through this methodology, he was able to have this possible damaging book, which would have messed up the Shias at that time or the Muslims of that time and could have been an end to Islam. He was able to quell that in an instant just from, mentioning this line of questioning to this wonderful and humble philosopher. Now, what are some things we can learn from this that I think are beneficial for you and I? Please recite Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The first thing that I want to highlight is the 11th Imam's expectations. Or we would say any Imam's expectations, but specifically the 11th, right? Because we have to keep in mind, the Imamat of the 11th Imam, the wilaya of Imam al-Askari alayhi salam, his duties, his wazifa, what he accomplished was unlike any other Imam. And I'm not just saying it just for the sake, it's the member, get your emotions riled up. No. His status, his socio-political environment was completely different. He had nearly zero access to the Shias. Almost every single thing that he had to do was done in secret. Even amongst Shias, he had to be very, very careful. One example that they give is when he was in prison in Samarra. There were obviously other Shias that were there with him in prison as well. So what the various khulafa, there was 3 khulafa basically who were there during the time, the 6 years of the imamat of the 11th Imam. Again, which is another strange thing. Only 6 years he's Imam. But during his time, he's in jail, right, in and out, but pretty much all the time. In these 6 years, he's in jail. in Samarra, Shias were jailed there with him too. Still, even though he was put in jail by the Khulafa, even with his Shias in jail with him, the Khulafa would still put spies in jail as well, just to see what the Imam would be discussing with the fellow prisoners. So sometimes the Shias would go and ask the Imam questions in prison. And the Imam said, look, there is an answer there, but we just have to give it some time before we answer. And he would know that there would be somebody amongst that group who was a spy. Once that person would leave, then he would say, look, the reason I waited is because so-and-so individual is a spy from the Khalifa. If I had to reveal this stuff, he would have added into his set of notes and given it to the Khalifa. When he comes back, check under his clothing, you'll find pieces of paper with all of our information, everything that we've discussed, and then you'll see for yourself. When the person came back, they checked, they found that paper, and then, they did what normally people do in prison. I'm not going to go farther than that, but they took care of it, right? So even in prison with other Shias, the Imam had to be very, very careful. So it wasn't easy to disseminate knowledge, but he still was able to do so. The Imam's expectation, especially at this point, and for us as future Shias, setting things up for the ghaibah, setting things up for Shias who will never have access, direct access like that to the Imam again, his main expectation was educated Shias. Shias who actually knew what they were talking about and who understood their own deen. Look at the first request that happens, right? This Shia comes to the Imam and he's explaining, look, my teacher, my philosopher teacher, he's writing a book about contradictions in the Quran. Now, the Imam doesn't just reply right away and says, okay, this is how you solve it. The first thing, if you remember from the story, is that isn't there anybody from among you or your other students who can actually reply to this guy? In a sense, it's like the Imam saying, why do you need me? Shouldn't you have understood the Quran well enough? Shouldn't you have understood our own teachings well enough that, you could have responded to him on your own? Shouldn't you have learned from the other A'immah that you would have been alive from or benefited from the teachings? Or even at the very least, even if this person had studied with, let's say, Sunni scholars. Sunnis don't believe in contradictions in the Quran. So even this individual should have learned from that and should have responded. But he wasn't able to. And it's a common thing that, people come to me all the time, and I know it happens to many Muslims, where they get confronted with all these issues. And they say, Mulana, Sheikh, Sayyid, I don't know how to answer this. Somebody at work came to me and asked me this. How do I reply? Somebody, my kid said this to me. I don't know how to reply. My mom, my dad, my grandparents said this to me. I don't know how to reply. And I've heard this on multiple occasions on multiple subjects. Just this morning, I was discussing the Azadari itself with, somebody who was born a Shia, who had been practicing Azadari for their whole life. And I asked him, we were talking about a specific concept in Azadari. They said, look, I've been doing it, but I have no idea why. For example, there's a few issues, but one of them was about, we go up until the 12th, right? We have majalis normally till the 12th, or you'd say night of the 13th, for example. I'd say, why do you do that? Why do Shias do that? They had no answer. None. I'd say, many communities call it a soyam majlis. You know that? And they said, I didn't know that. Like, okay, well, if you did know that, do you know why it's called soyam? Do you know what that word even means? No idea. Okay. So now when your kids or a Sunni or anybody else asks you, what are you going to do? I don't know. Okay, well, where's the name of the Imam in the Quran? I don't know. Well, where's your proof that the 12th Imam exists? I don't know. And it's not just Sunnis and non-Muslims who are calling that into question, because now even Shias are calling that into question, right? All of a sudden. We have no answers. The Imam is saying, why can't you answer this on your own? People keep asking, how do I get ready for the Imam of the time? What do I have to do? Educate yourself. It's very, very simple. One hadith, a very short, simple one from, again, Imam al-Askari, alayhi salatu wassalam. He's reported to have said, al-jahl khasm. Jahl, ignorance, is an enemy. When we think about this idea of oppressors and zalimeen and enemies, we're always thinking about the battlefield or people who are involved in taking too much money and all this grandiose stuff. Imam is putting it very simply. Ignorance itself is an enemy. The minute we don't know something that you and I should know, at the very least we should understand our own deen, our own religion, what we hopefully are gathering for and practicing and want to continue practicing, we should understand that, shouldn't we? Otherwise, it's going to become our enemy. And that's why you see so many individuals coming and calling things into question. And little by little, whether it's not just youth, because elders always say, oh, we're losing our youth. No, we're losing you elders too. You elders are pretty much the one that are making the youth go away too, because they're asking you for answers and you're not giving it. So don't just blame the youth for these problems. The youth are only going to have the issues if there's nobody there to answer it, right? And yes, I'll blame some scholars too. Don't worry. It's not just you guys. It's the people who sit on the minbar who maybe give rude answers, who say, you can't ask, don't ask questions like that. It's inappropriate. Although that doesn't really happen in this country or in this culture. I think more of that was in the East, right, where we grew up. Not so much over here. Hopefully, it's not happening over here. We're encouraged to think, I hope. But you see, this idea of education, that responsibility, it doesn't just fall on the shoulders of the students, meaning people who want to learn. It actually falls on the shoulders of two individuals. So obviously, the easiest way to look at it is all of us who want to learn more about Islam. Attend more workshops and read more books or listen to more lectures, whatever it is, right? You can figure out your own examples. You go and do that. But the other responsibility falls on the shoulders of people who take the position of educators, of teachers. Whether that means an Islamic teacher in an Islamic school, whether it's a Sunday school, madrasa, whether it's a homeschool, Islamic homeschool or otherwise, whether we're talking about public school education, whatever it happens to be, if that type of education that you're trying to imbue, that you're trying to help this child understand, if you are just trying to give them things to memorize, I guarantee you that that child is not going to grow at all. There's no way that child is going to grow. What we require now of every single teacher, what every student needs, is they need a teacher to help inculcate and encourage critical thinking, help encourage questioning. Because if the questioning, thinking, open-minded process doesn't happen now, then you see what the result is later on in their life. Even for individuals who, let's say, are researchers or speakers or scholars, you see the result now. That now that they have the chance to research everything and open up all these questions, now they want to go and spread it all over the internet. Like, oh, I just found this old book from this old scholar and look what he says here, it's different and I want to share it with everybody, right? So, that's not, you don't want to start this off much later on in life because it might be a bad thing. And some people may say, oh, it takes too much time. I don't have the time to go and do the research. Or a teacher may say, I don't have the time to go and do the full research so that I can help encourage critical thinking to the students. Well, then maybe you should rethink whether you should be a teacher or not. If you're not ready to fully help guide your student to critical thinking, then maybe the teaching position is not for you. You may be doing more damage than good. You may be harming that child's intellectual growth, where it's better if they go with maybe a non-Shia or a non-Muslim teacher that can help them encourage critical thinking and open-mindedness rather than a closed-minded Shia thinker. It may be better for them. We don't know. It's possible. Look at this interesting hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Man lam yasbir ala madad al-ta'lim wa ta'allum baqiya fi dhull al-jahl. Whoever doesn't have sabr and patience going through the trials, the tribulations, the talash, the difficulties in learning and education, again, both sides, whether it's the student side or the teacher side, if you don't, if you're not cut out for it, if you can't handle it, spending all that extra time, the blood, sweat, and tears that's required, Imam's saying, then you are going to remain in that status of jahalat. You're going to be ignorant then, whether you're the student or whether you're the teacher. So we have to be very, very careful that we are not engaged in that type of behavior, either from the perspective of the student or from the teacher. Again, this is why perhaps the Imam is saying, it would have been nice if one of you could have answered this teacher's question rather than me having to answer it for you. The mistake also the interesting thing that the Shia responds is that, look, we are his students. We can't say anything to our teacher. So this also shows that that philosopher teacher that they were going to maybe wasn't the best teacher as well. Again, going back to the same point. If that, whether he was a Muslim or not, that philosopher, if he was properly training his students, then they would have had, we'd say the audacity, but they would have been able in that classroom environment to question and challenge the teacher. If the environment that we create, whether we're a teacher or a parent or guardian, if we don't allow for that questioning to happen, then you see the growth is going to be stifled. And if that happens, then again, we know what's going on in our communities, in our households right now, and we want to make sure that we don't allow that to happen anymore, and we want to encourage that intellectual and spiritual growth in all of us. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The other quick point that I'll mention is how the Imam said, look, he had the answer ready for him. He said, yes, I want you to go and ask him a set of questions. But before you do that, there's a muqaddimah. There's a prerequisite. You have to do something first. you have to build a proper relationship with your teacher. Don't just come out of nowhere and just start, bombarding him with all these, aggressive questions. No, be kind to your teacher, show him love, show him respect, build that connection, build that familiarity, and then you can go and respectfully ask your question. So he's giving us perhaps a formula here too. One, which we've talked about, I believe, maybe last year, is that, again, for all of us in positions of authority, whether, again, we're educating or we have that wilaya over others, or we're students, there has to be that mutual level of respect for one another. Whether you want to question somebody or whether you want to teach them, you have to do that through the main principle of love. If we are going to do this through harshness, and we're going to be, kind of tyrannical, or more like the Umayyads in our style of imparting Islamic knowledge, then we know what the backlash is going to be. It's going to be empty centers. It's going to be, empty halls. It's going to be people who are, outside rather than sitting inside and paying attention. We know that's what's going to happen because they're not interested, and I don't blame them. If all they understand from Islam is, you're going to go to hell, you're going to go to hell, you're going to burn, and this and that, then, I'm not interested in that either. Nobody wants to just hear about hellfire and burning and pain and punishment. Yeah, it exists, but it's only supposed to be mentioned, given certain criteria. The main overarching principle of Islam, of deen, is hal ad-din illa al-hub. What is religion? What is a way of life except for love, in the words of the Imams? And this is what we hear constantly from the words of the Imams too. It's just, we seem to have lost something in translation and we only talk about the negative stuff, not the actual love, positive stuff. So that's one thing. The other part of it, which I think is beneficial for us to remember, especially in this time where everybody is online right now, everybody's hearing these little WhatsApp clips from people calling our basic belief systems and the aqa'id into question. And look, I'm all for open-mindedness, as I've been mentioning. I'm all for rational, logical discussions. I'm all for questioning things, especially the cultural traditions that need to be removed. I'm all for that too, definitely. My problem is this. The Imam here seems to have told his student, his Shia, be familiar and show respect and build a relationship with your ustad and your teacher first, then you can go and question. These so-called, progressive thinkers, these ones who are opening all these cans of worms and, causing all these controversies from halfway across the world, do they have any idea what's going on in the communities that they are addressing? Have they ever stepped foot in here for more than like an Ashra series? Have they built any familiarity with the people that they're talking to on Zoom or whatever, platform they're using? No. They're doing it from overseas. They're recording all this stuff or having these live sessions without ever getting to know who they're talking to. And this is a main principle that we have in education. That's why so many people were feeling the damage this past year when we were doing all this virtual learning, because it sucks. Nobody wants to learn online. You don't have that connection with your teacher. We need it in person. Everybody needs that face-to-face connection, especially a student and a teacher. So when all these individuals, again, maybe with good intention, I'm not going to deny that, and maybe their points, some of them may be valid, although most of them I've heard bakwas, honestly, but whatever. The stuff they're talking about, look, why are you causing these open fitnas and controversies and messing with the iman of people that you've never even met in your life? Why would you do something like that? What principle in Islam says, for people you've never even met, go open Pandora's box for them? Who said you can go and do that? In fact, we have the exact opposite in a hadith from our 11th Imam, Imam Askari alayhi salatu wasalam. And the hadith is a little harsh. I don't want you to apply it and say that he's describing these kind of speakers that are out there, but I just want you to understand the principle. So in this hadith, somebody is asking, or there's a conversation about good ulama, good scholars, and bad ulama, and bad scholars. So at this point in the narration, Imam al-Askari alayhi salam is describing what he calls ulama us-su, evil or bad scholars. And he says, وَهُمْ أَضَرُّ عَلَى ضُعَفَاءِ شِيعَتِنَا min jayshi Yazid ala al-Hussein ibn Ali wa ashabi. This is I read this and I had to do a double take basically. Imam is saying that these evil scholars, they cause more harm to the weak ones among our Shias. These evil scholars cause more harm to the weak people, the weak Shias, more than Yazid caused harm to Imam Hussein and his companions. Oof, that's a tough narration. Because we always say, look, there's no musibah, no masa'ib worse than what happened to Imam Hussein and the Shuhada. Imam is saying, and alam is-su, ulama is-su, bad scholars can ruin the weak Shias more, and they're more damaging then what happened? Then Yazid did what Yazid did in Karbala. And let's continue. فَإِنَّهُمْ يَسْبِلُونَهُمْ الْأَرْوَاحِ وَالْأَمْوَالِ. So he said, pretty much all Yazid did, and again, I'm sorry for putting it like this is the narration. He said, look, Yazid and the army, they took away the lives and the property of the Ahlul Bayt. He said, but وَهَؤُلَاءِ عُلَمَاءَ السُّوءِ, but these evil scholars, يُدْخِلُونَ الشَّكْ وَالشُّبْهَ عَلَى ضُعَفَاءِ شِيعَتِنَا. They enter and they put into our Shias, the weak ones in our Shias, they put doubts. They put shak, they put shubha, they put ambiguities in their minds. They confuse them. فَيُضِلُّونَهُمْ, and they make them go astray and they deviate these Shias. So the Imam is saying this is actually worse than physical death. And we know from the Quran as well, al-fitna is ashadda min al-qatl. Causing fitna is worse than murder. So, it's an open question, right? And I stand to be corrected if they have other evidence. But for all these individuals who want to go and spread their own new gospel, look, that's fine. But my question is this: what Quranic principle are you working with, or what principle from the Aimma are you using, which says that you can go and damage the iman of the Shias who may not be that educated? Which let's face it, the majority of us are not, because we've talked about this before. Our centers have not been designed for education for a long time. Or pretty much as far as I've been growing up. It hasn't been designed for that. It's been designed for reminders, which is good too. We need reminders, without a doubt, tadhakkur. But, and this is our third and last point, reminders, tadhakkur only works if the groundwork and the environment is set. You can only remind a person, or give them a reminder, if the basic stuff is ready inside of them. They have to have some base level understanding. For example, if I say, hey guys, remember that there's a conference, this Saturday at the Orlando Expo Center. All the best scholars on the keto diet, they're all going to be there. So, reminding everybody to show up. You're all going to be like, who are you talking to? Nobody here is going to go. Forget if it's a keto thing. If they talk about anything health related, nobody's going to show up. The community doesn't want that because it's not on your mind. It's not your interest. You want to eat unhealthy and you want to continue to do so. And you don't want me to talk about good health as well. I understand. I'm using it as an example right now. So me reminding you about something about keto or healthy food is useless to you because you don't care about it. In the same way, if we try to remind youth about all this religious stuff, like, let's have a youth session and let's discuss the Quran for an hour. You think like, we're not coming to that. We don't want to hear that stuff because they're not interested. And I don't blame them. Why would they be interested? How come they're not sitting inside? Because this is not interesting for them. Why would they want to come inside? Allah says in the Quran, in Surah Al-A'la, فَذَكِّرْ إِن نَفَعَتِ الذِّكْرَ. Remind people if tadhakkur and reminding is actually beneficial. If it's not beneficial, what's the point? You can only remind somebody if their attention is already there. If their attention is somewhere else, if they're stuck on the dunya, or they're stuck on their nafs, then me or anybody else reminding them about Allah or God or the Quran or religion or philosophy or anything else is not going to work. But if I want to say, for example, let's talk about, let's do a tafsir of Squid Game, because that's the latest thing I saw. I saw some other new things, but at least Squid Game is probably the most, the newest thing. Okay, everybody might show up for that at least, right? Because it's contemporary and, it's actually very interesting. And inshallah, I think maybe we'll set that up. But then people are like, okay, fine, I'll come to that. Right? Because they have some interest in that. Because at least it's something interesting. And it is interesting. Koreans make really good, movies and TV shows. What's interesting is, whenever people talk about advising, reminding, doing it with akhlaq, they always give the same exact story every single time. And it's the story of the two imams, right? The two young imams, Imam Hasan and Imam Hussein, alayhim wassalatu wassalam. You know which story it is, right? The wudu story, right? Every time we want to talk about how do you correct somebody, how do you remind them, think about these young two boys, Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein, alayhim salam. The old sheikh who's in there, he's making wudu incorrectly, and they come to him, Ya sheikh, can you please tell us and watch us, see which one of us makes wudu correctly. Sheikh's like, okay. And they go and they both do it. Obviously, they do it perfectly. And the sheikh then says, aha, I see what you have done. You have made me realize that I was the one performing it incorrectly. And then we all do a nada hedri or a loud salawat or whatever. Like, that's the story. Let's just be honest for a second. If we took two young kids from the community and they went and did that in front of one of the elders in the community, an uncle or an auntie. Do you actually think that would work? Or the uncle would be like, actually, both of you are probably doing it wrong. I was doing it right. You need to correct it. That's probably what would end up happening. And you think it's funny, but I've had, elders come and correct me on fiqh issues or philosophical issues or theological issues or historical issues too. Not to say that I know everything. That's not my point. But, when I offer the evidence, they say, no, that's not what it is. So, okay, I've given you, this is all the evidence I can give you. I can give you the actual screenshots or quotes, the ruling numbers from Tawdi al-Masail. I can give it to you in Arabic. I can give it to you in Farsi. I can give you emails from the daftar. I can give you videos from other ulama like Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi. I can quote you all this stuff. No, that's not how it was when you were growing up. Okay. So you see, reminders, the groundwork that needs to be set is that a person actually needs to be open-minded and humble enough where they're able to say, I actually could be wrong. And if you go back to this narration, that's what the Imam said. He said, after he instructed his Shia what to tell him, he said, look, this person is aqil, he's intelligent, he's humble, he's self-aware. If you present the question to him, it'll make him well aware enough where he's going to see the error of his ways. The problem with the model that we use in our communities right now of just trying to remind people is that for many of you, it might work because you have a basic level of iman, you've studied, you are basically educated. So simple reminders on Thursday nights or on a wilada or a shahada might be enough for you to just get that spiritual boost and then you go and you increase. That's wonderful. But there are a lot of individuals who don't have that scaffolding. They don't have that groundwork. They don't have anything to work with. So when they're hearing these reminders, they're not bothering listening because it's not addressed to them. And you see, that's why Allah has addressed people in many different ways as well in the Quran. And the Ahlul Bayt have also addressed people in many different ways as well. All right? So discussing that, inshallah, we'll talk more about that, I think, tomorrow night for our program then. Because I have some ideas in mind about what we may be able to do in terms of, we talked about having, one Thursday out of the month, maybe doing something a little different. So I've been thinking about it, and some people have shared some ideas. I think there may be some good one, but we'll talk about it more tomorrow night, inshallah. And then we'll see if it's something that may work out or won't work out. So just to wrap up this part, this idea, these lessons in ta'aleem and tabligh that we just received from the 11th Imam about education and tabligh, meaning propagation. We looked through the story of a teacher, meaning a philosopher, his student, and then both of them in terms of their Imam. One of them was directly affected, meaning the Shia, was affected by his Imam instructing him. That philosopher, though, was indirectly affected by the Imam. So we saw first off that you don't need to have direct access as we move towards the Imamate of the 12th Imam. Imam al-Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala faraju sharif. This is a very simple example. During the life of an Imam, when an Imam is present, where indirect information and education can be something where an Imam is actually guiding in that. We also saw that the Shias, one of the expectations from the Imam is that we all have to educate ourselves so that we are able to answer the challenges that we'll face in our own societies. We saw that Jahl, ignorance, is an enemy that we have to fight, that this responsibility of education, real education, falls on the shoulders of both the students, all of us, and the teachers. Right? And this is why we had that, we had Mizan Institute come and do that workshop on the secrets of Salah. And it was, alhamdulillah, very successful. There was over, I think, nearly 50 attendants. Sheikh Mahdi had done a wonderful job. And, it was very interactive. It was a wonderful session. So inshallah, we'll try to set up more of those in the future. The next point that we talked about was that Imam Ali was saying that we have to have sabr. Education is not easy. Teaching is not easy. If a person wants to engage in being a true Shia student or a true Shia teacher, it takes sabr. You have to put the time and effort into it. It's going to take blood, sweat, and tears. The next point was that we have to make sure that we start with building relationships, love, kindness, and familiarity. It's not about just spreading information all throughout the world. So these individuals, across the sea who are trying to enlighten all these Shias, maybe they should rethink that because they haven't built a relationship with us. And we saw that this hadith from the 11th Imam is that these things, this is a characteristic of an evil scholar. When they cause fitnas in the heart of the weakest among Shias, because they don't have that education, they cause them shak, they cause them doubts. They make them rethink their deen in that sense. And this is not a good characteristic. And then finally, we said that reminders are great only if we set that groundwork. So we have to have that open-mindedness. We have to open up our hearts and think to ourselves that, look, if I learn something that might be different than what I've been hearing for the last 10, 20, 30, 50, 60, 70 years, it might be different than what I've heard growing up, what I grew up with back home, I have to keep my mind open to that. It is a possibility that I might have misheard it, or maybe that speaker might have explained it incorrectly. Who knows? We have to make sure that we understand that a true Shia, education never dies, and that's why we'll end with this famous hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Where he's reported to have said that education goes from the cradle to the grave. We never stop in that pursuit of education. One more salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We mentioned that we don't have much information about the Imam, about the 11th Imam. And this in itself is a dhulm, right? It's a source of oppression. Because you have somebody who is the source of perfection and guidance on earth, and that information has been kept from the Shias around him at that time, and then of course has been kept from us as well. There are little bits and pieces that we can use to help us remember the difficulties that he went through. Our ulama mentioned that among the Ahlul Bayt, among the Imams, that there were 4 Imams who were poisoned by the Zalimeen and the oppressors of their time. They say the first Imam that we remember in terms of their poison, because every single poison that was given had a different effect on that Imam. The first one we remember is, of course, Imam al-Hasan. And we remember the shiddah, the intensity of that poison, which was so much that some narrations say that it made his body turn green. And they say that once Imam Hussein was sitting with him, trying to take care of his older brother, and that because of the intensity of the poison, they say, Imam Hassan had a dish with him that he would cough up blood in. And the poison would eat up at him so much so that pieces of his liver would come out in his blood as well. And Imam Hussein asked his brother, he said, Akhi, ya Mawla, ya Imam, is there anything that I can do for you? I see you in this state and it breaks my heart. Tell me, what can I do for you? So Imam Hassan tells his younger brother, he says, this bowl that I'm using here, take this and hide this somewhere. He says, Akhi, why do you want me to hide this bowl? He says, because in a few minutes, our sister Zainab will be coming into this room, and I don't want to see her heart broken when she sees the state that I'm into. So hide this bowl from her eyes. I don't want her to see this pain. This is one Imam who was poisoned. Another Imam that we remember is Imam al-Kadhim. And they say that with the intensity of his poison, they say even though it was slower acting, the intensity of that poison was so much so that it became painful for the Imam even to eat one bite of food. The Shias used to sneak into prison to go and give him one bite of food. They'd say they'd bring him dates just so that he would have something to eat because they wouldn't give him any food in the prison. So the Shias would come in, they would take a date from the pocket and they say, Yabna Rasulullah, please take this date from us so that you have something to eat. And he said, no, I can't take this date from you. He said, please, why not? Because even this date, even if I have one bite, it'll burn up my insides. This is the way the poison is affecting me right now. So I can't even eat one date bite. We remember Imam al-Rida, and his poison, they say, was so intense that when Ma'mun had given him that poison in front of him, and the ghurba of the Imam that he was all alone, it was so intense that the Imam fainted and fell over and died on the spot. But because he was all alone, gharibul ghuraba, by himself, there was no one there to catch him, no sahaba, no family member, no one. So he fell right on the ground in that moment and passed away, right in the presence of Ma'mun al-Mal'un. And finally, remember the poison of Imam al-Askari. And they say that the poison was so intense in him that it affected all of his bodily movements. One of the Shias who had come to visit him while he was in prison, they saw the Imam reading his salah while sitting down. And they say, Ibn Rasulullah, why are you praying like this? Why are you praying sitting down? They say, don't you know that the poison that the Khalifa has given me is so intense that I'm able to get up. I cannot even move my body anymore. And it was in this state that he passed away. And we remember that there was one other individual in history, in Karbala, Ansha Maghriba, who was not given any poison, but who was also unable to pray in the way that she wanted to pray. And we remember Ansha Maghriba, when our beloved Bibi Zainab, when she Ansha Maghriba, not in a wajib prayer, but in her namaz-e-shab, when Imam Sajjad comes to her and he sees her sitting down, reciting her Salatul Layl, he says, Ya Amma, why are you praying like this? I know that all your prayers you pray standing up, why are you sitting down like this? He said, oh Imam, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, don't you know that it's not poison that's affected me, but the thirst, the lack of food that we've had in these days of Karbala, the heat from Karbala, the pain of seeing all of our family members like this has affected me so much so that I cannot stand in my salah anymore.
ألا لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره صلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
ردا زینب ہے بھائی شام کے بازار میں، بے ردا زینب ہے بھائی دیکھنے خلقت ہے آئی شام کے بازار میں، بے ردا زینب ہے بھائی، بے ردا زینب ہے بھائی شام کے بازار میں، بے ردا زینب ہے بھائی، بے ردا زینب ہے بھائی شام کے بازار میں، یوں ادا اجر رسالت ہے مسلمان نے کیا، قید احمد کی نواسی کو کیا ہے بے ردا، کر رہی ہے جگ ہسائی شام کے بازار میں، بے ردا زینب ہے بھائی، بے ردا زینب ہے بھائی شام کے بازار میں، بے ردا زینب جانے کب سے کر رہی ہوں ایک چادر کا سوال، کوئی سنتا ہی نہیں پر تیس میں میرا سوال، ہائے کیسی بے نوائی شام کے بازار میں، بے ردا زینب ہے بھائی، بے ردا زینب ہے بھائی شام کے بازار میں، بے ردا زینب آئی آسماں تک نے نہ دیکھا تھا ہمارا سر کھلا، گھر سے باہر پاؤں بھی ہم نے کبھی رکھا نہ تھا، ہائے قسمت ہم کو لائی شام کے بازار میں، بے ردا زینب ہے بھائی، بے ردا زینب ہے بھائی شام کے بازار میں، بے ردا اے خدا ہوتا نہیں کیوں آج یہ سورج گہاں، سر کھلے بازار میں آتی ہے غازی کی بہاں، کر رہی ہے یہ دہائی شام کے بازار میں، بے ردا زینب ہے بھائی، بے ردا زینب ہے بھائی شام کے بازار میں، بے ردا زینب ہے بھائی، بے ردا زینب ہے بھائی شام کے بازار میں، بے ردا زینب ہے بھائی. سورۃ الفاتحہ.
اعوذ باللہ من الشیطان اللعین الرجیم بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم السلام عليك يا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. السلام عليك يا بيبي خديجة الكبرى أم المؤمنين والمؤمنات عليها السلام. السلام عليك يا إمام علي بن أبي طالب عليه السلام. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدتي نساء العالمين عليها السلام. السلام عليك يا إمام حسن والإمام حسين سيد شباب أهل الجنة عليه السلام. السلام عليك يا بيبي زينب وبيبي أم كلثوم. السلام عليك يا حضرت محسن شهيد عليه السلام جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا وارث آدم صفوة الله. السلام عليك يا وارث نوح نبي الله. السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله. السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله. السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله. السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا وارث أمير المؤمنين عليه السلام ولي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن محمد المصطفى. السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله حتى آتاك اليقين. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخات والأرحام المطهرة. لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها ولم تلبسك مدمد لهمات ثيابها. وأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين. وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرزي الزكي الحادي المهدي. وأشهد أن الأئمة من ولدك كلمة التقوى وأعلام الهدى والعروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا. وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبإيابكم موقن بشرائع ديني وخواتيم عملي وقلبي لقلبكم سلم وأمري لأمركم متبع. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا ابن نبي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن الحسين الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها الشهيد وابن الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها المظلوم وابن المظلوم. لعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. السلام عليكم يا أولياء الله وأحباءه. السلام عليكم يا أصفياء الله وأوداءه. السلام عليكم يا أنصار دين الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار رسول الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي محمد الحسن بن علي الولي الزكي الناصح. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي عبد الله بأبي أنتم وأمي طبتم وطابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم وفزتم فوزا عظيما، فيا ليتني كنت معكم فأفوز معكم. السلام عليك يا أبا الفضل العباس ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن سيد الوصيين. السلام عليك يا ابن أول القوم إسلاما وأقدمهم إيمانا وأقومهم بدين الله وأحوتهم على الإسلام. أشهد لقد نصحت لله ولرسوله ولأخيك فنعم الأخ المواسي. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة استحلت منك المحارم وانتحكت حرمة الإسلام. فنعم الصابر المجاهد المحامي الناصر والأخ الدافع عن أخيه المجيب إلى طاعة ربه الراغب فيما زهد فيه غيره من الثواب الجزيل والثناء الجميل، وألحقك الله بدرجة آبائك في جنات النعيم. السلام عليكم جميعا شهداء كربلاء وأسيران كربلاء جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك أئمة المسلمين يا علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي. السلام عليك يا إمام مهدي يا صاحب العصر والزمان سيدي الأمان الأمان الأمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا قابة الإيمان. السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان. أجل الله لك ما وعدك من النصر وظهور الأمر جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرزك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على